Hey, welcome back, I'm Lei. This is a quick video on the in-flight abort test yesterday as I thought it was an important development. So here we go. What we're seeing in this shot is a live stream of Falcon 9 bleeding fuel before launch. The entire process took less than 10 minutes and it was a successful and important demonstration of capability. We started off with the launch and at around 86 seconds into the launch, all Falcon 9 engines were shut off and Super Draco fires immediately to get Crew Dragon as far away as possible from the first stage. Apparently, according to Elon during the press conference after the launch, it was a capsule that decides when to eject itself and fly away from the rocket. This makes sense because otherwise today's test will simply be a show if everything is pre-sequenced. The Dragon capsule adjusted its re-entry orientation to come back with the heat shield side facing the Earth, and after successful deployment of drogue chutes and Mark III parachutes, a successful splashdown was achieved. During the press conference afterwards, the team specifically focused on the Mark III parachutes. I just want to add that the set of parachutes have different patterns on top so we can identify which is which. Super thoughtful on SpaceX part. In comparison to Soyuz launch abort system, which was actually used last year during an emergency, the Soyuz has a different system. The image shows from left to right the firing of the Soyuz abort system carrying the orbital module, descent module, and a portion of the payload fairing from the launch vehicle. The separation of the descent module from the rest of the assembly, the deployment of parachutes and separation of heat shield, and finally, the firing of landing engines. Crew Dragon uses Super Draco instead of the abort tower, which is a much more complicated system, but arguably also safer for the astronauts. This launch, in a sense, is a wet dress rehearsal of the worst-case scenario, that the system detects an imminent threat to the astronauts and fires Super Dracos to get Dragon capsule as far away as possible in the short period before rocket explodes. This ensures that no matter what happens, SpaceX Crew Dragon is able to secure the safety of astronauts during their journey to the International Space Station. In principle, the crew should be safe in all scenarios because unlike the escape tower on Soyuz rockets which ejects after 2.5 minutes, Super Dracos are built into the capsule and are functional all the way into space. From a business standpoint, this is a big deal and is a huge relief on Elon, as we all know what happened to the capsule during the last test. He had to make sure that this time it's a success. I have no question that when Elon said during press conference that the team is going to double check, triple check, quadruple check everything before crew launch, he meant it. There was a piece of news a few months ago on SpaceX suppliers falsifying documents on critical rocket parts. It was discovered. But imagine the potential danger that could follow. Making sure every screw on the rocket is in perfect condition is a top priority of SpaceX. We all remember how one simple design flaw of the rubber O-ring has resulted in the biggest disaster in space history. On the other hand though, we should also not worry too much about the unimaginables because Falcon 9 is one of the most reliable rockets in the world that we know. Also, business-wise, this success is going to be a huge blow on Boeing, bring in question on Boeing's capability. Let's remember that Boeing has gotten $1.6 billion more funding from NASA than SpaceX to build their own spacecraft, yet it is now decisively lagging behind SpaceX on the project. On top of that, every Starliner seat will cost $35 million more than Crew Dragon when it becomes operational. Last month, Boeing's International Space Station demonstration mission failed to send Starliner capsule into the right orbit due to a third-party component issue, basically conceding to the competition. From a SpaceX fan's perspective, we should also not be too optimistic about SpaceX competitor losing out because this will not result in NASA spending solely on SpaceX. Rather, I would expect more funding in the future for Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, and etc. Jim Bridenstine is very precise during the press conference. He thinks of this as a success not just for SpaceX, but for NASA's commercial programs. He represented the NASA perspective that it took a gamble on SpaceX over 10 years ago when SpaceX had nothing, and now it is paying off, saving NASA billions of dollars. This is very important. We all love SpaceX and what SpaceX rightfully claims as its contribution to the space industry, inventing reusable rockets, but NASA's perspective is different. It rightfully claims its contribution and faith in SpaceX when no one believed SpaceX will succeed. Without NASA, SpaceX would have died 10 years ago. This perspective means NASA will double down on the strategy of investing in smaller companies to innovate and compete rather than spending solely on the big players. Like it or not, SpaceX is now a giant in the market. This means more money for Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and other smaller rocket companies along with SpaceX, but less money for Boeing from now onwards would be a good idea.